In World War I, soldiers from enemy sides described exactly the same thing. A woman in white walking among the bodies in the darkest hours of the night. She had no face. She left no footprints. And still, every one of them swore they saw her.
The disturbing part is this. When that figure whispered a name, that soldier died hours later. No matter his side, his rank, or his luck.
Doctors recorded deaths with no cause. Witnesses claimed the figure floated over the mud, and the diaries confirm it.
They called her the White Lady. And if she appeared in your trench, it meant you were already dead, even if you were still breathing.
But this barely scratches the surface. The truly unsettling part begins with the first file. The first thing we found was a detail that didn't fit. Soldiers from enemy sides, men who never met, described the exact same apparition. A woman dressed in white walking among the corpses. The scene repeated itself. In Ypres, in Verdun, in the Somme. Different languages, different trenches, the same figure.
And there was something else. Something that shouldn't repeat so often. And yet it did. Every time that woman whispered a name, the soldier died hours later. It didn't matter if he was British, French, German, or Canadian. The pattern was identical, cold, mathematical.
The strange part is that no army ever officially registered a woman in those zones. No nurses, no civilians, nothing. Only soldiers' testimonies, all speaking of a faceless woman who left no footprints.
But the case that really starts everything wasn't the first one told. It was the first one ever written down.
The first solid record appears on November 12, 1917, in a British trench in the Passchendaele sector, west of Ypres. It belongs to a soldier named Thomas Ward, service number 14,285. His letter was found among his belongings after his death. In the letter, Ward describes waking up during the night. Not because of artillery, not because of screams of visitors, but because of a whisper. When he opened his eyes, he saw, according to him, a woman in white, kneeling beside me, calling me by my name. No embellishments, no symbolism, just a direct description.
The location corresponds to an area where there were no nurses or civilians. It was an active combat point. At that hour, nobody should have been there, much less an unidentified woman.
The most unsettling part comes at the end of the letter. Ward wrote, "The lady in white called me. I don't want to sleep." That same dawn, a shell hit his sector. 3 soldiers survived. The only one who died was him.
There's no evidence the apparition caused his death. But there is a pattern. The vision, the whisper, the immediate consequence.
And what we found afterwards proved that Ward wasn't the only one who had seen her before dying. To understand what happened, we have to look at the setting, without romanticism, just data. On the Western Front, soldiers lived between mud, sterilized by mustard gas, constant rain, rats and bodies mixed into the earth. Many slept without knowing if they'd wake up to an artillery strike. The line between reality and delirium was thinner every day.
In that environment, any army would expect reports of hallucinations, extreme fatigue, sleep deprivation, psychological trauma. But here's the part that breaks the easy explanation. If it were an individual delusion, each soldier would have described something different. A different figure, a different face. Something created by his own mind.
And yet, they all described the exact same thing. A faceless woman, dressed in white, walking or floating over the mud, whispering names.
And when records from other fronts appeared, it became impossible to call it coincidence.
When you compare the documents, the pattern forms by itself. First record, British soldier, February 14th, 1916. He writes that he saw a white woman leaning over a wounded comrade. He heard her whisper a name. That same comrade died before dawn. Second record, German infantryman, May 3rd, 1917. He notes that a faceless female figure approached a sleeping soldier, said his name softly. The soldier died hours later, with no visible wounds. Third record, French artilleryman, October 21st, 1917. He describes a pale woman floating over the mud, whispering a comrade's name. That man died in silence, with no signs of trauma. He simply stopped breathing.
3 nations, 3 different trenches, 3 languages, the same sequence, vision, whisper, death. But here comes the uncomfortable question. Is this a real pattern, or just statistical coincidence within a war where thousands died every day?
Coincidences don't usually repeat with this precision, and even less with the same description.
And then a testimony appeared that had no medical explanation or logical one.
The strongest document appears in the medical record of Field Hospital No. 32, Verdun Sector, August 17, 1917. It was written by a French nurse, Émile Laurent, a meticulous man obsessed with recording hours, symptoms, and causes. At 2:14 a.m., Laurent reports that several soldiers claimed to see a female figure entering the wounded tent. They described her as a white woman, faceless, soundless. At 2:17, Laurent notes that the figure leaned over soldier Pierre Morel, mentioning, according to witnesses, his name. At 2:23, Laurent certifies that Morel died, not from infection, not from hemorrhage, not from trauma. Simply, his heart stopped.
The unsettling part is the clinical description. Laurent literally wrote, "I find no physical cause. Vitality ceased suddenly." And this type of note wasn't common, much less in the chaos of Verdun. On top of that, 3 soldiers confirmed seeing the figure. 3 secondary witnesses, 3 identical accounts.
And again, no female personnel were assigned to that sector. There was no way a woman could have been there, much less floating between the cots.
But everything took on a different dimension when we went to the location and discovered that the terrain didn't match any logical explanation.
We arrived in Ypres, at the very spot where hundreds of soldiers claimed to have seen the woman in white. And the first thing that stands out is the terrain. The mud here sinks over 30 centimeters. Anyone trying to walk at night would leave deep footprints, visible marks, noise, weight compression. But in the records, none of that appears.
We measured the distances between the sectors described in the letters. From the British point to the German one, there are nearly 1.2 kilometers, with no cover that would allow someone to move without being seen, and especially not in complete darkness. Night visibility in 1917 was less than 2 meters, and any human figure would have been detected by patrols, sentries, or even by the sound of the mud.
We also compared military maps. The area where Thomas Ward claimed to have seen the woman matches a ditch where the Mood still pools today. It is physically impossible to cross it without sinking, or without leaving clear traces.
And yet, the testimonies insist she floated above the ground. Literally, no footprints, no sound, no displaced shadow. Nothing that explains a human movement.
What stands out the most is the consistency. Every location analyzed fits one detail. No human being could have walked there without being detected, without being seen, or without getting trapped.
And it was right here in Ypres, where we found the witness who changed everything and whose account matched the soldiers who were already dead.
In Ypres, we met Hendrik, a man over 70 whose grandfather had fought in the same sector where Thomas Ward died. Hendrik didn't talk about ghosts. He didn't talk about myths. He only repeated what he had heard since he was a child. Hendrik, deep, slow voice. My grandfather said they weren't women. They were messengers. They appeared on moonless nights. They walked among the bodies without sinking into the mud, and they called those who would not see the sunrise.
We listened without interrupting. Hendrik described the figure with precision. Pale white, faceless, slow movement, silent, far too similar to the testimonies written decades earlier.
I tried to find inconsistencies, dates, memory errors, typical confusion from stories passed down from generation to generation, but nothing failed. Nothing. Every detail matched the letters, the medical journals, the previously verified locations.
The most unsettling part was this. Hendrik described the leaning of the figure over the wounded in exactly the same way Émile Laurent had written it in Verdun, without ever having seen that document.
His testimony didn't add something new. It added something worse. Confirmation. The same figure, the same behavior in different places, at different times.
And what he said at the end opened the door to the most disturbing file of all. There was one point we couldn't ignore. If the figure appeared right before a soldier died, how could it accurately anticipate deaths that no one could foresee? Inevitable deaths, deaths without warning, deaths where not even the doctors knew something was about to happen.
And the strangest part, that figure always appeared in areas where survival was nearly impossible. Zones with crossfire, trench collapses, terminal infections, or surprise attacks. Places where even the living seemed condemned.
If it were a hallucination, it wouldn't follow such an exact pattern. And if it were a real person, no one could move through bombings without being hit.
The question is simple, but it opens an abyss. How did it know who was going to die?
The only way forward was to review the file that no officer ever wanted to explain.
The most baffling file is that of Canadian Sergeant Michael O'Connor, file C447/17, dated December 9th, 1917, northern sector of Passchendaele. At 22:41, O'Connor writes a short note in his notebook. The woman in white called me tonight. She said my name. I don't want to stay here. At 22:55, he formally requests to be reassigned. The officer in charge denies the request, arguing that there were no signs of psychological collapse and that they couldn't move units in the middle of attack preparations.
The second note appears at 0012. O'Connor insists again. He says the figure was near, that he couldn't hear her, but he could feel her. The officer refuses again. There is no record of any other medical or disciplinary intervention.
At 3:03, a shell hits the exact edge of the trench where he was. 3 soldiers survive with moderate injuries. The only death is O'Connor, A direct piece of shrapnel to the torso, clean impact, lethal. And here's the disturbing part. The exact point where the projectile landed matches the last recorded location in his reassignment request.
Neither his superiors, nor the rest of the unit, nor the doctors had any way of anticipating that impact. But according to O'Connor's own letter, the figure had already called him hours earlier.
The file doesn't suggest supernatural intervention, but it also doesn't offer a rational explanation. It only leaves an uncomfortable record. Vision, whisper, warning, death.
And when we lined up all the cases, logic began to break.
After reviewing all the cases, it was impossible to keep calling this an apparition. It didn't fit. It didn't behave like a ghost. It didn't act like a person. And it didn't operate like an infiltrated enemy. What we had in front of us wasn't an entity. It was a pattern. The figure always appeared under 3 exact conditions. 1, the soldier was destined to die within hours. 2, his death was inevitable even without prior signs. 3, neither doctors nor officers nor comrades could anticipate it. But the figure could. It didn't intervene. It didn't attack. It didn't change anything. It only appeared, observed, spoke the name, as if confirming something already decided.
And that's the most disturbing part, because if it were a myth or rumor or collective suggestion, the timing wouldn't match, the sequences wouldn't align, the deaths wouldn't be so precise. But here, everything follows a logic that is too stable, too exact, to be a construction of fear.
We're not dealing with a common apparition. We're facing a phenomenon that seems to recognize the exact moment when a life is about to end, even before the body shows it.
And if this model is real, then the last question is the most uncomfortable of all.
At this point, there was only one responsible way to approach it: put every hypothesis on the table and see which one could bear the weight of the facts. First hypothesis: collective hallucination. In theory, fatigue, trauma, and sleep deprivation could generate visions. But hallucinations don't repeat themselves in 3 languages, 3 different fronts, and with the same physical description. They also don't synchronize with later deaths with such precision.
The consistency among soldiers who never met makes this explanation collapse quickly.
Second hypothesis: misidentification. Maybe they mistook a nurse or a lost civilian, but no person can float over mud that sinks 30 centimeters. No one can walk through mined terrain without leaving traces, and none was recorded in those sectors.
Also, testimonies match even on nights with 0 visibility. Too precise to be simple confusion.
Third hypothesis: suggestion. Rumors becoming real because the soldiers believed them. The problem is that some witnesses reported the figure before hearing any story, and others didn't know of her until they wrote their own letter.
Suggestion doesn't explain the cases where the appearance was the first event and not the last.
Fourth hypothesis: a symbolic figure associated with death, as if the brain faced with collapse created an image to anticipate the inevitable. It's the most narrative explanation, but it still doesn't fully fit, because this figure doesn't appear in mild wounds, doesn't appear in survivors, doesn't show up in cases of clinical improvement, only appears when death is already on its way.
And if it's symbolic, why do 3 different cultures describe her the same way? And why does she align exactly with inevitable deaths? No hypothesis closes, but all point to the same place.
And that led us to the most uncomfortable conclusion, the one no soldier wanted to face. If there's something worse than death in war, it's recognizing the moment when it starts walking toward you. Some soldiers knew it without understanding why. Others heard it whispered in the dark, and all agreed on the same thing. They were not alone when their end approached.
Because for them, death wasn't a concept, nor an abstract fear. It had a shape, a silent figure, dressed in white, faceless, crossing the mud without sinking, calling by name those who no longer had a future.
We might never know what they truly saw, or why so many described it the same way, but in the records, in the letters, and in the war diaries, the story repeats with unsettling accuracy.
Some soldiers swore that death walked among them, soft, calm, inevitable, and they called her the White Lady.